Alright, in this video, I'm going to walk you through the process of setting up a forensics tournament from beginning to end, going through all of the different screens on Tabroom.com. So, to start things off, you need to find your profile page on Tabroom.com. Here's what mine looks like. You may not have quite as much going on here down the right-hand side, but somewhere you should have a button that says Request a New Tournament, so we are going to start there. Now, unless you've run some weird virtual tournament somewhere in the past, this is going to be entirely new for all of us, so we're not going to be able to clone anything. Now, it may be that you have a neighbor who's run a tournament that you kind of liked already. You might be able to clone their tournament, but even so, we'll go through everything here. So, I'm going to name the tournament. You can choose what you want the web address to be. Set up the dates of when your tournament will run. Now, the start time is going to be important because if you're using something like NSDA Campus, this start time is what tells the tournament that it should turn those rooms on for people, including their squad room and including your utility rooms. So I don't mind having it think that it starts at 8 a.m. on Friday, even though we know it won't really. Onto the location. This is going to be an online tournament that I'm setting up. There's two different ways that you can kind of have this online tournament go. You can either say, I intend to use NSDA Campus, or I'm planning to use some other service, like some kind of Zoom rooms. Maybe I'm running the tournament fully asynchronous. However the case may be, you can make whatever choice that you need for that. I'm not going to click the test tournament button because I don't want you to be confused by the other settings that are on there, but the test tournament setting in Tabroom is a good place where you can create a big sandbox to play in if you want to. The next screen it's going to take me to is to setting my deadlines. I can decide when this tournament's going to open up. Now, since this is not a real tournament, I'm going to set this way in the future so then I can delete the whole tournament when I'm done with this video. This is when you want your registration deadline to be, so maybe I want Monday evening. You can change all of these later. You can change them even after the deadline and reopen things up. And these other optional deadlines just say, when is the last moment you want still everyone to have to pay for whatever entries they have? So after this deadline, any drops will still be charged on the invoice that teams print out. This is the deadline for when judges should be added or changed in the tournament. This is the deadline for when, once a school has registered, they can still change the name of their competitors or make drops themselves without your intervention. And this one is actually a little bit confusing. Some tournaments use something called a drop fine, where it actually costs you more not to compete in a tournament after you've said you were going to. That's not a typical practice in Kansas, so I usually ignore that. Now for tournament circuits, it will take you to a screen where you can choose which circuits you want the tournament to be listed in. I suspect most of us want to list our tournament in Kansas. You might also want other circuits to show up. This is just going to determine who can see on their profile screen that your tournament is open and ready to go. And then it asks for our tournament location. Again, I said I'm going to do this online via NSDA Campus, but here is where, again, you could choose I'm using a different service instead, or I'm using some asynchronous video. And see, it's checkboxes, so I can use more than one thing. Notice that if you do use synchronous other service, you need to set up a site. And, you could even just use like your school building, I suppose, but there are probably going to need to create a new host site with just whatever room numbers you want to create. We'll look at that a little bit later. I'm planning to run an NSDA campus. I think most people probably who are running anything live are doing so. So I'm going to stick with that. Now I've created the tournament. I'm nowhere near done. but it's gone through and confirmed the tournament request. It's got all the information that I need. Now, if I go back to my profile page by clicking on my email address in the top right corner, you'll see under the word tournaments on this right side, I now have the tournament that I just created, the O&W demo tournament. And you can see that me as the Kansas Circuit admin now have a request to approve that tournament being placed on the Kansas Circuit. I'm not going to approve that. So if I click on the tournament, the first place it takes me to is the current registration page, which is empty. There are no schools currently registered for the tournament. We expected that. We just created it. Let's go through the settings one by one. First, under the settings for tournament. These are mostly things that you already set. The name of the tournament and the website and where the tournament is located. You can change all these at any time and then hit save. This is also where you can upload the PDF or Word or whatever file that corresponds to your tournament invitation. If you are hosting Student Congress, you can upload the congressional debate legislation packet. And if you have a cute little logo you want to have on the web page, you can do that here as well. On the General tab, let me take you through a few of the settings here. You can require adult contact information when they first register. I really like to log all registration changes so that I can see when things have added and dropped. If you are running a small tournament or you have some other reason why you really want to control who's in this tournament, then you can do a closed tournament. This might be appropriate for some of you, but I'll warn you, it's probably a giant pain in your neck from a forensic standpoint to be hand registering everyone's individual entries at your tournament. This is that test tournament button. You'll notice it has automatically decided that I am a test tournament, I think because it detects the word demo in here. But like I said, I want to turn that off because I don't want to see those other settings that it's going to show up. I like to publish the list of registered schools. That gives you that the institutions in attendance button you may have seen on a tournament where it'll list all the schools who are coming. You can put a tournament-wide cap on entries. This is probably more relevant to our world when we're back in person again. If you choose to use Tabroom to host, you know how many rooms you have, you know how many entries you can take. For an online tournament, the internet is as big as we need it to be, so I'm not going to put a cap on my entries. For your school code style, you can choose letter codes, a shortened school name, or you can say there's no school codes, we just use the full school name. I like to use incremental codes that use numbers, but sometimes you have to tweak that a little bit to make that work. There's nothing else I want to change here. If you want to use the on-site registration button, that's something you can set up down here. I'm not going to mess with that for an online tournament. I think it's not necessarily the most useful thing for you, but if you wanted to do that, that's here. Now I'm going to go to my dates, and you'll see these are mostly things I have already put in. There's a couple more boxes than we had initially, but these all pretty much are what they say they are. When does registration open? When are new entries due? Script info and uploads. I'll show you when we get to setting up events where we can require folks to put in some information about their performances. And then all these other deadlines, they're what we were before. The next tab is access. If you want to add anyone to your tournament, if you want to add someone who's going to help make sure that you have all your settings right before you go live, if you're going to have other people helping you run the tournament during the time, this is where you add them. You put in their email address that goes with their Tabroom account, and you can grant them access in a variety of different levels. For messages, there's one place I want to sort of highlight for you, and that's this disclaimer that appears before registration. If you are wanting to be fairly restrictive about your registration, that's totally fine. I understand, as the coach of Olathe Northwest, that I am not necessarily invited to every Kansas tournament just because it shows up on tabroom.com. But it's generally probably nice if you would put something in a disclaimer that's going to pop up to tell me that that might be the case. So this tournament is only for people in the such and such league, or this tournament is only for folks who've received a direct invitation, or if in my tournament, in my case, since I accept out-of-state entries, I have a warning that says the 500-mile rule still applies even though we're virtual, so please keep that in mind if you're registering. This is a little pop-up that they will have to click OK to before they can jump in and try and complete their registration. Most of the rest of these I don't ever really mess with. Other than up here, this is your invoice piece. This is the thing where you're going to make bookkeepers very happy. You definitely want to put who the checks are payable to with an address, and if there's any other message you want to have up there. The housing tab doesn't even make sense for us really, mostly when we are having tournaments. And notes is just a place where you can store whatever notes you want that will preserve for future years. So that's under the tournament. Now we're going to go to rules and results. Under rules and results, you're setting up two different things. You're telling the tournament, how do I want tiebreakers to be run? And we'll look at how sweepstakes happens. Now we're going to have to come back to those after we've created our events, but I'm getting ahead of myself. There are a number of default settings already in the tiebreakers. If I look at speech prelims, it's going to default to using ranks, then the reciprocals of ranks, and then points. If you're happy with that, you can leave it. But if I'm going to go for the Keisha standard, I don't use reciprocals. I just use ranks and points. I'm not worried that it says 1 and then 3. It's just, it's going to do this one first, and then this one, and that's fine. Then you might choose whether you want your final round to be cumulative or what we call cutthroat typically in Kansas, but what Tabroom calls sudden death. Again, it's going to say, here's the ranks from elims and ranks from prelims, but it's doing a weird thing with those prelim ranks, isn't it? It says accept the one worst, so I'm going to go edit that. I don't want it to drop any scores, so I'm going to delete that, say none. I don't want to use reciprocal ranks. I do want to use judge's preference as my next tiebreaker if I'm going by the Keisha standard. And then I'll do points from all rounds. Now notice, when it has these two tiebreaks both listed 1, it's going to take the ranks from elims and the ranks from prelims, and it's going to add them together. If I deleted these and made one line where it's just ranks from all rounds, that would be equivalent. If you are hosting debate events or Congress, you might take a look at those settings as well. Now under sweepstakes, this system is a little bit more complicated because, man, does everyone do sweepstakes a little differently all around the country. But let's say I'm doing a standard top 16 entries. I'm going to count 16 entries across all events. If I'm just doing a straight up top 16, I don't need them to all be in different events. I don't need to count a specific number of events. I'm just going to save that. Now, it's not going to be able to add any events yet because we haven't created events. We're going to have to come back here to add those events in, or else it's not going to work. But right now I'm just counting 16 entries. I haven't told it yet what to do. If I go to the rules, it's blank. So I'm going to add rules, and I'm going to show you the one that corresponds to what we usually use in Kansas. And that is down here, the invert each individual rank from prelim rounds, subtracting the rank from 6 to a minimum of 1. That is your Kansas default normal sweeps that almost every tournament runs. If you wanted to mess with having sweeps also count on elim ballots or some other things, you can play with that. But if I just press this plus here, then now that rule is in my sweeps rule set. This is how Tabroom would know exactly how to do sweeps the way that your tournament might be doing it. Now, if I don't want to do top 16, if I instead want to do 2 per event, you could put that here, like your A and B or whatever have you. So that's the rules and results. Next, I'm going to go to my Judges tab. You can decide how complex you want your judge system to be. You might, if you are hosting debate events, want to have those events have a separate judge category. It's possible, but not very likely, that you might even want to have separate judge categories for speech judges and for interpretation judges. But if I'm just going to have one, I'm just going to call them judges. And there's a weird thing that happens. See, a lot of these settings are not here yet, but if I hit enter, then they all show up once I've named this thing. I do need to put an abbreviation, and the reason is because otherwise there will be some weird, awkward blank spaces. So I'm going to put judge. Looking at the rest of this, I do like to publish the list of judges online. You definitely need to require all judges to have a linked Tabroom account because for our online world, that's necessary for them to access those online ballots. If you are requiring schools to bring judges, probably you are doing it based on some number of entries per judge owed. For instance, at my invitational tournament, if you're coming to me, every 12 entries you need to bring a judge. The rest of this, I'm going to kind of leave. And then you'll notice, if I save, once I've put in a burden, there's some other ways you can tweak the burden even further. So if you're one of them who's like, I want to be, your first 18 entries are free, and then it's a judge per 6 entries after that. There's a way to make this all math out to be whatever it is you need it to be. And it's just a matter of playing with it to make it all work. Under hires, I never touch anything here. We don't really do hired judges in this way in Kansas tournaments. For judge tabbing, the thing that I sometimes will do is to randomize judge assignments. Tabroom thinks it's pretty smart. It will see that a school has a bunch of maybe info entries, and it will say, that school must be more qualified to have its judges judging info, and it will do its best to put those judges in those events. If you don't want that to happen, just turn this on to randomize those judge assignments instead. The training online ballot sounds nice. I've never found it to be particularly useful. Other people may have different experiences, but I usually don't mess with that. We aren't going to have any ballot hand entry. And we don't need to worry about these ballot options. This is for paper ballots, so none of that's going to be applicable this year. So mostly you don't need to touch the tabbing screen. We do not tend to rate our judges, so I'm not going to do anything with that. I am a big fan of judge shifts. This will allow you, when you are hosting, to set up shifts of time where a judge who's registering can turn themselves off for the times they're not available. To do that, we're going to need to set up shifts. So let's say I'm going to have rounds on Saturday at 8 a.m. So it's going to start on the 6th and end on the 6th. The shift starts at 8 o'clock a.m. and ends at, we'll say, 9:45. You do not want these shifts to overlap. Bad things happen if the shifts overlap. And then my next round is going to be Saturday, 10 a.m. Just, we got Zoom fatigue. We got tech issues. It's going to take a little more time to get this tournament up and rolling. So my round 2 is going to happen from 10 to 11:45. Round 3, I'm going to go from noon to 1:45. And then let's give ourselves a little time to make sure that finals all looks great. So I'm going to go on Saturday, 2:30 p.m. is going to be my final round. Now, those of you who've come to my invitational tournament, I do semifinals and all kinds of other bells and whistles. I'm trying to model here more of just, this is probably something like what your standard Kansas tournament schedule might look like this year if you are trying to run a live tournament. Now, If you are running asynchronously for part or all of your tournament, you would want these judge shifts to be set up during the week in some way that kind of illustrates a round during the week. And that can be a little bit trickier to get Tabroom to speak that language, but just setting up those shifts for whenever you'd want your rounds to be or when you'd want your asynchronous rounds to pretend to be. Now, if you're using judge shifts, I don't also then use judge pools. And you'll notice I can't use judge pools anyway because I have not configured a tournament site. This is a drawback of using NSDA Campus, is that until NSDA comes in and turns on your NSDA campus rooms during the week of your tournament, you aren't going to be able to use judge pools. So I don't. It's fine. And then finally, on judge messages, I don't ever use any of this. So now let's look at how we create an event. I've got my judges created. So I go Settings, Events, and it's blank. That's because I don't have any events yet. So let's add one. Let's make dramatic interpretation, which has the logical short abbreviation DI. On this screen, I can set however much I want each entry to cost. I can set how many students should be on each entry. Once I have one event going, I can clone the settings to make another one. We'll come back to that. If you've set up multiple judge categories, you can tell it which judge category goes with this event. This is where we set up our entry codes. So maybe I like to use the school code and entry name. This event is a speech event. Everything that isn't Congress or debate is a speech event for us. And this is an open tournament. Now, if I hit save, there's a pop-up that comes up because I touched the codes button. Don't worry about that. Now, there's one last option now that does come up once I've chosen speech, and that is to choose which NSDA points it is. But for the moment, this drop-down is not doing anything. That is curious. What it should do is give me the option to select dramatic interpretation. I'm a little confused as to why it's not doing that for our video here today, but hopefully that's just a little quirk that Tabroom will fix. Going to my registration tab. If you have some event where you want the deadlines to be different than your other events, this is where you'll go. I don't mess with that almost ever. I do think I like to publish the field report and entry list on the web. This is the part where you can have it be where other people can see who has entered your tournament. If I want to cap the number of entries in DI, I can do that here. If I want to limit each school to a number of entries, I can do that here. I always like to maintain a waitlist and waitlist all entries. For those of you who are nervous about Tabroom.com just being open to anyone in the world, this is your security blanket. This is you getting to say, no, only certain people are coming to my tournament. Or even if you want everyone to be able to come, this is still you getting to be that gatekeeper of letting people in. And I do include the waitlist on the published reports and accept TBA entries. These are my recommended settings for this. This is going to be the easiest thing for your registrants to kind of understand. Now, you may want to ask for the titles or whatever corresponds to this specific event. And the reason is because, especially online, when our judges are just seeing those ballots, these titles will show up on the ballots and hopefully minimize the number of times that a judge writes comments for one competitor and scores for one competitor that are meant for someone completely different. I don't mess with any of the other settings here. I'm just going to save the settings. Now, this is an online event. I need to tell it here on this tab it's an online event. And I only see two options here. But remember I told the thing I was using NSDA Campus. We'll come back and we'll talk about that. I'm going to leave the rest for now. If you're not using NSDA Campus, if you're going asynchronously, you'll choose this option. If you're using some kind of other synchronous method like Zoom, you'll choose this option. Under sectioning, I do like to enable live updates. For your prep events like Extemp, this is where you'll put how many minutes before the round start time you want that to happen. But otherwise, I don't mess with a whole lot here. I'll deal with the section sizes when I'm actually sectioning the round. Go into tabulation. If you are running a standard Kansas tournament, your points are whole points. We don't allow worse points, but we do allow tied points. We don't allow rank ties. You can set up your minimum and maximum speaker points, however you want them to be. Maybe I want to run from, 15 to 30. And it's going to be very important that for each event you turn on use online ballots. And then, again, it asks us to put the minimum and maximum speaker points and pay attention to this default timer speech time. That's going to be where they can put in, your judges will have a timer on their ballot. I know that's controversial. I know in Kansas it's technically against the rules for the judge to be the official timekeeper. But if there's going to be a timer show up on their screen, we at least want it to have the right number of minutes on it. So we are going to put that there and save those settings. On the ballot, this is where you can add any messages you want the judges to see as they are putting in their ballots. Usually I just put it in the text on top ballots. You can see also by default, NSDA is going to include their NSDA statement on bias on every judge's ballot. That can be edited here if you choose as well. And there's nothing I want on the Updates tab. So we've just created one event, and you are exhausted thinking, how am I going to do that 11 times? But we don't need to worry about that. Because when I add another event, if I say I want to add humorous interp, now I'm going to clone the settings from DI. And what that's going to do is it's going to take every other screen will match what I already did. It just doesn't do it for this screen. So I do need to say, okay, this is HI. HI is $5 per entry. There's one person on a team no matter what. Entry code is going to be school code and entry name. The event type is speech. And again, I don't know why that NSDA points drop down is behaving badly today. But if I go through and check the other settings, I'll see that everything else is set exactly as I had set it for DI. Now, if I get around to Extemp, of course, there's things I would do differently with that. But for now, let's say I'm just running a tournament with DI and HI. You can kind of figure out how it would look to add those other events. The next thing on our settings is the schedule. Right now, there's nothing. Setting up your schedule in Tabroom, the beginning piece is we have to add some time slots. So I'm not messing with the Friday component of the tournament right now. I'm just going to add Saturday round 1, which starts at 8 a.m. and ends at 9:45. Notice those are the same times I told the judge shifts to work. And again, it's very important that these times not overlap even a little bit. One needs to end before the next one begins. If I set the end time of round 1 to 10 o'clock, and then the start time of round 2 to 10 o'clock, Tabroom will take all my judges from round 1 and it will think they're still in use at 10 o'clock, so it won't give them a round 2 ballot. And then here's my Saturday round 3. And again, you can change how these time slots work if you are going asynchronously. But those are the time slots I'm setting up. And so far, this is just on my tournament skeleton, like when a round might be. You'll see I have these events listed that are still in pink buttons here that mean I do not have any rounds scheduled in them. So if I click Dramatic Interpretation, I have little check boxes on my time slots that I've created. In each round that pops up, I can decide what kind of round it is. Rounds 1, 2, and 3 are prelims, but this round's a final round. And I don't want it to label round, it'll by default round 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to call this one final round. You also must select Tiebreakers tab. We'll yell at you if you leave this blank. This is speech prelims for any of our preliminary rounds, and it's whichever elim round you're choosing to use. That's going to make sure that Tabroom correctly tabulates your events, and it's going to make sure that it asks for the right things on our judges' ballots. This just created a schedule for DI. Now if I go to HI, if I want it to be exactly the same, I can just clone the DI schedule, and there we are. Next setting is sites and rooms. You can add a tournament site that is either a physical tournament site or a virtual one that's like a bunch of Zoom breakout rooms. Or this is where you can go to configure NSDA Campus. And remember when I was setting up the DI site and I said, I'm going to choose online, but I don't have the button I want yet? Well, here, if I tell it, I'm going to use Campus for this event, then if I go back to those settings, you'll see that shows up a little differently. This Configure NSDA Campus screen is very important. This is where we actually will purchase the rooms and get invoiced for them. And this is where you must allocate rooms to those days if you're using NSDA Campus. The NSDA is tremendously helpful on helping you deal with these things, but you have to know a couple of things. Number one, they only work during business hours. If something's on fire on Saturday, they may not be able to help you quickly. And number two, you need to give at least 3 days of lead time on your purchase to make sure that you will have the rooms allocated that you need for your tournament. So just keep that in mind. Now I'm going to go back to my settings events real quick, and you'll see if I go to DI Online, oh, that's changed too. I lied. There used to be a way that NSDA Campus would show up there, but magical thing about Tabroom is that it's always changing just a little bit. By the time I get this video published, they'll have moved some button somewhere, and that's fine. Next setting, let's look at money. I probably don't need to do anything here, but this is another place we can change the payable to messaging. This is where we can go and double check that our entry fees are correct. Like I've set DI to $6 and HI to $5. That seems weird. I don't really mean there to be a serious performance tax. So let's make those actually the same. You can add individual fees. You can do all kinds of things that just don't really do anything for us in Kansas. When we're back in person again, you can even do pre-ordered concessions items through Tabroom. It's kind of cool. But mostly we're not touching that. And then on the settings website, this is where you can adjust the messaging that's showing up on your web page. So on the main page, you can add any content here. That's what shows up whenever they click on the tournament website. You can also add some of your own custom text to the field reports. That's the list of entries, the list of judges, or your schedules that are posted during the event. I don't usually do that, but the main page I do use. You can also add custom pages if you want to add a page that's like, here's our schedule, here's a link to our live doc, here's whatever else you need. You can add those custom pages. So that's all the settings that you would have associated with setting up your forensics tournament. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful. I know none of this has anything to do yet with how you actually run the thing, but this will at least get your tournament set up and hit the ground running.